So without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Hashey. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome Buff State PDS consortium members, our international partners. Welcome back to school, literally physically on campus here today. Student teachers, those of you who are watching this now or as a recording, congrats on this milestone. Exciting time, exciting week for you to get back in the classroom, as well as to see our young people also joining the classroom. So knowing the ropes, strategies for teaching and supporting positive classroom behavior. I added those first three words, knowing the ropes, as a nod to our nautical themed all hands on deck, but more, importantly about the idea that knowing the ropes is the process of understanding principles related to something. So in maritime terms, that's literally knowing the ropes of a sailboat. Here we'll talk about some of the principles that underlie effective approaches to teaching and to supporting the classroom behaviors that we hope our students are exhibiting in our classrooms, our hallways, and our buses. And ultimately those same kinds of behaviors as they move into our community as full citizens. So let's look at the agenda real quick. We'll talk about a little bit more specifically a rationale for us being here and having this as a topic. We'll look at some of the evidence, what research and practice tell us about what works for supporting positive classroom behavior. We're going to spend a lot of our time talking about the importance of teaching important behaviors and procedures in the classroom. And we'll start to address some approaches to addressing the challenging behaviors that, despite our best efforts, bubble up to the top and happen in our classrooms. So we'll talk about some initial strategies, the importance of having a plan for integrating lots of these practices. And then also we'll be sharing quite a few resources with you that I hope you'll use this session to sort of consider and think about what are some areas that I want to do a little deeper dive and follow up on some of those resources. The outcomes that we've set here are pretty clear, and hopefully that you'll agree they're worthwhile. We'll talk about that relationship that exists between student behavior and student learning. We'll talk about the practices that we employ as teachers in our classrooms within a tiered preventative framework, so that's PBIS, which many of you are likely familiar with or have heard about. Most importantly, adding to your repertoire of positive and proactive classroom management practices. For many of you will be hopefully this will reinforce some of the ideas and approaches you've already learned, and perhaps add to your toolkit. And then again, as I said, identifying resources to continue this learning. I want to invite you to consider a few of these affirmations, consider and adopt a few of these affirmations that I believe are central to our work supporting students' social emotional behavior. And if I didn't say this already, I'll be sure to share this PowerPoint with you all, and we can upload it to the All Hands on Deck webpage. The first affirmation is that kids don't come to school choosing to have behavioral challenges or difficulties. The second, well, a corollary to the first actually, is that as a result of that reality, kids don't come trying to do this on purpose, that we can't take behavior challenges personally. If we see ourselves, second bullet here, as relentless, resourceful teachers, that we believe that we can be the single most influential factor in kids' learning trajectories. And one of the key ways that we can do that is by teaching them how to be successful in the social, emotional, behavioral realms. Sometimes we make presumptions or assumptions about what kids know and can do in terms of their interactions and behavior, when they need a little bit more from us as their teachers. The fourth affirmation is that we believe that classroom management is a way of making our instruction more effective, supercharging our teaching. So we'll talk about that relationship. And the fifth point here, that we don't have to do this work, that we get to do this work. And we get to do this work at a time when we are, and Doug Fisher and colleagues' words, rebound, when we're ready and poised to rebound. When kids need us, perhaps more than ever, certainly more than ever, I'd say, to build or rebuild the skills that are going to help them be successful in their classrooms. So no secrets here. The struggle can be real at times in terms of managing our classroom behavior. Teachers, especially early career teachers, report feeling unprepared. They're stressed out when it comes to addressing challenging behavior. So it's no surprise that these challenges are a major factor in teacher attrition and teachers' decisions to leave the profession. And finally, and super importantly, it has also been identified by our PDS consortium stakeholders. So our partners in the schools, administrators, teachers, international partners, as something that's worth spending our time doing. So the effects of behavior difficulties are not just teacher stress, of course. We see lost instructional time, kids falling behind grade level, a gap which, by the way, increases over the academic years as kids experience more difficulties. Behaviorally, the gap, unsurprisingly, becomes bigger between where they are and where they should be, as well as low engagement, motivation, and morale. So just got a little bit of feedback there, but I think we're good. Thumbs up for good? No feedback? Okay. So let's think about behavior and instruction as having a reciprocal relationship on each other. When one is good, the other tends to be good. When both are good, all systems are firing. So we really need systems in place in our classrooms that support both of these ingredients: good instruction, good behavior management, to create and maintain this positive feedback loop. So one useful framework for engaging in this work systematically is PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, which we can see from this pyramid is a tier, what we call a tiered framework to support behavior, much like we use a tiered framework in response to intervention to support positive reading outcomes. And I want to just emphasize that the tiers are not where kids go. The tiers are within our control. The tiers are, they consist of the practices that we do as teachers, that we engage in as teachers to support all students. Those who, so a majority of those students, of our students, 80 to 85%, will benefit and be successful with typical good behavior classroom management practices. A smaller subset will need more targeted interventions, while an even smaller subset of students in our classrooms are going to need intensive, individualized support. So we have lots of great data spanning the past several decades that highlights the effectiveness of these tiered systems like PBIS and like RTI for reading. So some of the outcomes for PBIS are here listed on the left-hand side. They involve improved academic outcomes, social emotional outcomes. So more of the good stuff, less of the things that we don't want to see, like exclusionary discipline experiences. So sending kids to the office, suspending students from our schools, and teaching them in secluded settings. And then a final outcome, an important outcome for us as teachers, is that PBIS helps teachers gain a greater sense of self-efficacy, have a stronger sense of positive school climate, and perception of school safety. All desirable outcomes, I think we can agree. So we'll spend, I guess I'm going to go back for just 1 second. We're going to spend most of today talking about tier 1 practices. So what are those things we want to have firmly in place to provide a strong foundation for all learners? Once we have that in place and some kids are still having difficulty, we can know that it's likely not us, it's probably the student who needs something additional above and beyond what we're doing for most students. And before we get into some of those practices, I think it's important to acknowledge that Historically, in the US, certainly, our classroom management practices haven't been implemented in ways that are culturally responsive or sensitive to the reality that students come to our classrooms with different beliefs about what is acceptable behavior. Beliefs that are different often than their teachers' beliefs and experiences. So before we judge as teachers a student's behavior, it's really important that we seek to understand. So a starting point for that is for that work, which is a long time coming and something that needs, in this last point here, a sense of urgency, I think, from all of us, experienced teachers, teacher education faculty, as well as new and incoming teachers who are student teaching and hopping into the classroom in their first couple of years, that we treat this with urgency. So for starters, we can look for something called cultural gaps, which is just a fancy way of saying when teachers' beliefs about acceptable normal behavior in the classroom is different than students. Teachers and students have a gap there in what they view as acceptable and normal. So, for example, does maintaining eye contact convey respect or disrespect? Is family involvement something that is an obvious foregone conclusion in terms of the family's role in the child's education, or is it something that is foreign and unheard of? How about interpersonal space, for example? Is this desired and a good thing, being close to someone, or is it more appropriate to have a gap or to overuse the term, a space, a more substantial space between two people when they're talking or interacting? So acknowledging those cultural gaps, acknowledging that they exist, is a prerequisite to thinking about our classroom expectations. And then thinking about in what ways are my classroom expectations not taking into account my students' expectations. And the most important piece here, the most important sort of step in this process that I'm sharing with you here, is that when we do see a gap, to acknowledge that gap and understand that we need to have some conversations about the fact that those gaps exist, and then set clear expectations for our kids, for the students in our classrooms. So that's something that I'd like us to bring into our planning about the expectations we set. Typically, they're posted on the classroom wall, and we may not give enough credence to the idea that there are different ways of thinking about behavior and acceptable behavior. So looking at Castle's social emotional learning framework, we can see how proactively looking for and addressing cultural gaps is a way that we can tighten the connections between communities and schools, between families and classrooms. So acknowledging differences first, and then most importantly, using that evaluation or that analysis, that looking for gaps, to help us identify the behavioral expectations that we need to explicitly discuss with kids, so they understand our reasoning, in which we can then model for students and practice with kids until we're walking in lockstep with a consistent view of what's good classroom practice. And so for me, that this is an example of how our classrooms can and should and must be microcosms of the world beyond our classroom walls. So one that appreciates and understands differences exist, one that requires us to have conversation and dialogue around those differences, and then mutually informing each other about ways to work together. So I'd like you to get your chat box fingers ready here. And in the spirit of all hands on deck, in our belief that we are stronger together, that we are that we're comprised of a wide range of expertise and experience, and that we're better together. I'd like you to think about an example of just a good classroom practice, what we'd call a tier 1 classroom management practice that you're already using. So we can brainstorm brag here. And if you're bashful, please don't be, because we need to see each other's successes. So please think about sharing a single practice that you've already put into place or that you're planning to put in place when kids arrive later this week. If you're not teaching, what have you seen other people doing? And if you're not sure, no pressure at all. So let's take just about 30 seconds here and open my chat view here. What are some of those things that we're doing in our classroom? But if you're an administrator, what are you seeing your teachers do? Or have you seen your teachers do? Relationships, Jen, great. Establishing classroom rules, super. Shania, talking with kids, letting them know you're here, finding out what's eating them. Call outs of peanut butter and jelly, good. So yeah, attention getters, great. I saw choice theory there. And Leader in Me, love it. Great program that we have, a great set of offerings we have through our School of Education partnerships with Franklin Covey. Got a few more trickle in here. Circle meetings, great. So having that village mentality, Kelly. Great, getting to know kids personally, connections with kids, connections. Yeah, we can certainly agree that relationships are that foundation of any and all of our work. Learning doesn't happen without relationships. Good classroom management and behavioral techniques don't happen in the absence of relationships. Parent communication, Samantha, nice job splashing the pot at the end there with the idea of family involvement. Yeah, really important, absolutely. And giving students, hi Sherry, giving students time and space to share, absolutely. Yep, great. So let's take a look at some sort of broad categories. And I celebrate you this is our silent clap, our ASL clap. So nice to see all these great things happening in our classrooms. Kids are in the center. Yes, Aunt, totally with you. Let's look at some of these sort of broad topics that, given this list, will look familiar to us. So school-wide behavior expectations, linked with classroom expectations. That third bullet point for me is hits the nail on the head. Having a continuum of procedures and approaches for supporting the behaviors that we want to see and for discouraging the things that we'd rather not see in our classrooms, or that we definitely don't want to see in our classrooms, as well as links to schools and families. So what I'm going to suggest is, surprise, we don't need lots of different things necessarily when we think about providing effective tier 1 classroom and behavior management practices. It's that we need a continuum. It's that we need a combination of these practices applied consistently in our classrooms and applied with fidelity. So that's just the idea of applying a practice as it's been designed, as you perhaps read about in your textbook or as you saw your mentor teacher do. So applying it consistently, applying multiple approaches, so casting a wide net and doing that with fidelity is the set of practices that's going to make a world of difference. It's not a single thing, right? We can all agree with that. And there's a whole host of research spanning decades that can really help us hone in on what works in this realm. And one such collection of practices is called the high leverage practices for inclusive classrooms. These are a collection of 22 practices that are organized around these four main categories: instruction, assessment, collaboration, as well as social, emotional, and behavioral realm. So they've been developed by the Council for Exceptional Children, as well as the Cedar Center, and some of your very own Buffalo State faculty members and partners. And they've been developed with the input of administrators, teachers, teacher education faculty. So you'll see Larry Mahedi's name as one of the editors of this book, who's a member of the exceptional education faculty. So we're going to focus on just a few of the high leverage practices in the social, emotional, and behavioral realm. That picture there on the right-hand side is a textbook, which is a wonderful resource. There's also a fantastic website, highleveragepractices.org, which I've linked to in the reference section. And specifically, we'll focus mostly on these foundational practices related to establishing consistent, organized learning environment, providing constructive and positive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior, with an emphasis on behavior here. So predictability is essential. We can all agree with that. So lots of different examples, great examples related to classroom rules and expectations. I'm going to say again that teaching of procedures is a key part of that first strategy, providing kids with feedback, as well as optimizing instructional time. And that's a nod to the idea that while we focus on classroom and behavior management, we can also focus on strong, effective, engaging teaching as a way to reduce the likelihood of problem behaviors happening. So this is perhaps the least groundbreaking slide that I hope to share with you tonight. And that's just the idea that when we set clear expectations with kids, they should be few in number. They should be stated positively. So what we're hoping that the students will understand and will do, that we define them with examples and non-examples, and if at all humanly possible, endeavoring to develop classroom expectations, a shared set of expectations with students is super powerful. And I would argue that there's no group of students too young to do this work with. If you're a new teacher, understandably, that might seem a little bit challenging or like a tall order, but you'd be surprised that kids can, in fact, successfully co-construct classroom expectations that end up on a poster on the wall. And so talk about ways to build student agency and ownership. I think this is just low-hanging fruit for us to do at the beginning of the year. And of course, you have the ideas of expectations in your mind, and as teachers, we guide students to the promised land. I'd like to sit and spend some time here with this strategy of teaching procedures explicitly and modeling them. It's possible that I mentioned earlier, tend to assume that kids know how to meet the expectations that we've set, even that we've set collectively, when in fact what they need is more instruction about the procedures that will help them be successful in meeting classroom expectations. So I'd like to offer that there's a tight connection between procedures and routines that we set in our classroom being the way that students are able to follow and rise to our classroom expectations. So modeling, both demonstrating and describing what students do, not just showing them what it looks like, but describing what they might think of, what they might consider as they're moving through a set of steps that we're teaching them about any given procedure. So for example, what lining up looks like, what lining up well looks like in our classroom. What does it sound like? So students can generate these ideas. And I think part of that modeling and guided practice, we think of that gradual release. They can see me do it and describe what's happening, but students also need to practice. They need to articulate some of those steps themselves as they gain independence in important procedures. And of course, they need our feedback. The more specific, the better. And something that we don't tend to come back to in terms of classroom routines and procedures until it's too late, until we realize we need to reteach something. We tend to perhaps not review as often, especially at the beginning of the year, some of these strategies, some of these procedures we want kids to follow. So all of a sudden it's December and it's like, wait, didn't we teach this? Yes, we taught it in September, but we didn't come back to it. We didn't reinforce, we didn't confirm that students were indeed doing it well when they were doing it, or if they needed to change something.
Anne had a comment in the chat, Dr. Hashey, about.
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, thanks, because I'll have to come over to it here.
About giving it.
Sometimes showing them what it doesn't look like is valuable. Absolutely. So when we talk about examples and non-examples, yeah, and it's fun for kids on a short leash for a short period of time to actually show me what lining up poorly looks like in our classroom. What do we want to avoid? Let's take 30 seconds and everyone get up from your desk and show me what a non-example would look like. It doesn't include any of the things we just discussed. Great, thank you, Anne. Absolutely. Yeah, it helps kids really home in on what it should look like and what it shouldn't look like.
Hi, I'm all right.
Super. And so one of the really helpful sets of skills that we can infuse into our behavioral teaching, our modeling through demonstration and description, are self-regulation skills. So selecting, monitoring, using appropriate strategies is this collection of self-regulation. It's what we as expert learners in the academic realm do. It's what we as well-adjusted, mature adults do with our social, emotional, behavioral skills. So Doug Fisher and colleagues in their rebound text have some great structures and ideas related to goal setting and self-monitoring that I'd encourage you to look at and explore. I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about self-instruction. So that's self-talk. It's the narrative that goes on in an expert learner's head. So this happens with academics, and it can and does and should happen in our instruction with behavior. So let's look at let's think about a scenario here. Oops, cursor's off here. Okay, super. So so lining up is a challenging transition time. Coming into the classroom to start the day can be challenging. So if kids were let's picture the kids having difficulty in this kind of scenario. Here are on the right-hand side of the screen are some of the features that I try to incorporate into a think aloud as I'm demonstrating and describing a new procedure for entering a classroom. That think aloud, as I hope will sound familiar, thinking about academic instruction. I want to encourage us all to use this when we're setting kids up for success in the behavioral realm, to shine a spotlight on our expert thinking. Using precorrection means thinking as a teacher, what are the areas that my students might have difficulty with this task? And in my model, I'm going to head them off at the pass. I'm going to show them why this isn't a good thing or how to avoid this hurdle. So precorrection is really effective here. Helping kids see hard work as leading to success just as much, or I would argue more, than just getting it the first time. So the more and more kids hear this message that hard work equals success, this is also consistent with the rebound text, the more likely they are to persist at something that's difficult, whether it's behavioral or academic. Within my think aloud, I also want to try to point students to resources in the classroom, and then also to incorporate reinforcement. What are some things that are going to help them feel good about their work, their hard work? So, okay, so let's picture someone coming into our classroom. You see challenges, you see a moment to teach more explicitly the procedure of walking in. So I'd say to my students, okay, so I want everyone to watch me and listen to how I sort of think through my way as I enter the classroom and get to my seat. Okay, so I'm thinking about the goal. Okay, so listening to me. I'm at the doorway, I'm thinking about our goal, about coming in quietly, nicely, appropriately. Okay, I know this has been difficult for me, but I know that I can do it. I just need to try hard, and I can do this. Okay, what are the steps? I can follow the steps on the board if I get lost. So let's look up there right now. Okay, come in with a level 1 or level 0. Perfect, I can do that. Go straight to my cubby. Great. Okay, next thing, I need to make it over to my desk. I really want to say hi to my friends, but I'll wave, I'll smile at them. We'll talk later. I get to my desk, I take out my journal. Okay, ooh, I can self-evaluate. That's the last step. Okay, self-evaluate how I came in. Geez, I followed all the steps. I'm a superstar. Oh yeah, I'm a circle superstar. So that was a lot of steps, but I did it. Feel good, right? So it's not just us. It's not our students watching Mr. Hashey come into the classroom on mute and seeing me do the steps visibly, but they get to hear my internal dialogue, that self-talk that we take for granted as expert learners, and that students need help hearing, seeing, understanding, that it's something that all learners do. And then we can model what that expert thinking looks like. Okay. So I want to encourage you to come back to some of these attributes, with these features, as you're thinking about your modeling of both academic behaviors and things in the social emotional realm. So let's pause here for just a minute. Let's think about, are there any expectations, procedures, routines? Just 30 seconds in private, doesn't have to be in the chat, please. Are there areas of my classroom practice that I might be able to be a little bit more specific about? That I might be able to model with some of that self-talk? This is a personal planning session. So write those down, write a few ideas down, and let's come back at the end of September 23rd is our first follow-up session. If you can join us, let's talk about how that went. How did that modeling feel for you as a teacher? What were the results with your students? Okay, so we'll follow up on those. Now, each of these items could be their own slide, their own long conversation. But to the idea that there needs to be a continuum of strategies in our toolkit, let me share a few of these. If they're all familiar, great. Keep on integrating those into your practice. If not, then I'm going to share some resources from the Iris Center, which you see at the bottom here, a fantastic collection of self-paced professional development learning modules, and they're free. My absolute favorite resource, professional development resource. Positive praise. Kids need to hear what they're doing well, much more than that they're not doing well. So a 4-to-1 ratio is a nice idea. Keep in mind behavior specific feedback. So instead of, hey, Andrew, good job getting started this morning. Wow, Andrew, I really like how you came in, you went to your cubby, didn't talk to anyone, you gave a little wave, got your journal out, you got started, you remembered to fill in your self-evaluation. Whoa, all of a sudden, the student gets a lot of detail about the things that they did correctly. So behavior-specific feedback, the more specific, the better. And when I give that oral feedback to one student, the rest of the classroom gets to hear that too. So it's not just going to one student. Reinforcement, high fives, thumbs up, good jobs. These are all important parts of our toolkit. Tokens or points are wonderful as well. Last idea of growth mindset harks back to that, to our previous notion about attributing hard work with success. And that builds student agency, builds students' ability to see themselves as hard workers and capable workers. Just an example of a collection of these resources. Iris Center offers wraparound concept maps, so they'll have a theme in the middle with a bunch of linked resources surrounding them. So they're in the top right, the related modules are 4 resources that I think are great starting points to dive a little bit deeper into some of these concepts, or to freshen up on some of these concepts. And I'll let you peer around the website and the resource locator. Very, very user-friendly. One of those most important classroom, not classroom, modules is this comprehensive classroom behavior management plan. I can't say enough about the importance of entering our school years with a plan. If we leave this work, this classroom behavior management, to chance or whenever I have time to fit it in, likely it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen in the way that we hope that it would happen. So strongly recommend, if you don't have something like a classroom management plan, it looks a little something like this in terms of its core components, that you take some time to build one for yourself. And you can add to it over the course of 6 successive years. The one item here, the one component that I like to point to is the action plan, that sometimes, even if we have lots of good practices in place that we use consistently, we don't always communicate those plans and expectations with co-teachers or with related service providers that we work closely with. And sometimes we also don't do the same service, provide that same communication with families. Super important partners. So thinking about how am I going to share these expectations with families? Google Classrooms are great places to put up some of this information, so families understand some key ideas. Finally, optimizing instructional time. One of the things I mentioned earlier was having that strong offense, that strong instructional offense will reduce behavior management, help us reduce the likelihood of behavioral difficulties. A specific part of optimizing instructional time is giving kids frequent opportunities to respond. And one of the easy ways to do that, low-hanging fruit for us, is using choral responses. So students answering in unison orally, or using response boards or response cards, where they're either predetermined answers, they can hold up, you can quickly scan. So when we ask one student in a classroom of 25 students, 24 students get a little bit of a break, right? If we ask for a choral response or to hold up a response board, everyone's present and accountable. So really great outcomes and great data supporting the effectiveness of just giving kids lots of opportunities to respond. This next set of strategies is a little bit different than the proactive approaches that we've been talking about so far. So surface management strategies are things that we can use as teachers without losing our momentum, without stopping instruction, without having a standoff with a student. So they let us address minor behavior challenges that trickle to the top. Somehow they trickle to the top, or they rise, they bubble to the top, and could be a little problematic. And they're really easy to implement. So what do they look like? And again, these are detailed in more depth in the IRIS modules that I've linked to. I won't go through each of them, but let's talk about 2 strategies here and on this slide: signaling and proximity control. Signaling, giving nonverbal cues to students that their behavior is not appropriate. So it's not pausing, it's not having a long conversation, but it's something like a hairy eyeball, a brief pause in the middle of a sentence with eye contact can signal to students that, geez, the teacher's on to me. They don't like this behavior. It's not acceptable. I'll get my head back in the game. Another really easy surface management strategy is called proximity control. That just means you're seeing the same minor disturbance, perhaps some talking, some giggling, some off-task behavior, and just moving your body around the classroom close to the behavioral concern. And again, that gives a signal to someone that, the teacher's standing right next to me. I know that they're not missing this behavior. Maybe I need to sit up a little straighter and start attending a little bit more closely. 2 more in pink that I'd like to talk about: hurdle help. Academic difficulties are a really common precursor to behavioral challenges. So academics get difficult, student gets nervous that they can't meet that expectation or complete the task that we're asking or about to ask them. And so the behavior challenge starts happening. So being just aware of this possibility, and you start to see some consistencies. Every time when independent math practice, this student or this group of students start getting squirrely, it may be sometimes that hurdle help is all they just need help getting started on what appears to be a difficult or too difficult task. And the final surface management strategy that I think is worth chatting about is really effective, and it has a term that is surprisingly attuned to our current pandemic state. And I've been talking about and teaching this strategy of antiseptic bouncing for many years, and this is the first time where it doesn't feel like a strange term. So this is just the idea that when a student's having difficulty, and particularly when they're having difficulty with another student, it's a nice way to separate students without calling someone out, and it's not giving them a timeout. What it's asking them to do is to leave the classroom on an errand. So you can have a little envelope on your desk, and it can have a nothing message. It can have a quick message like, can you smile and say thank you to the students, give them a compliment. And so you'd ask a student who's in crisis or sort of having difficulty to go deliver this message to the office or deliver it to a peer with whom you've already established this understanding. So the colleague gets the message, they say thank you to the student, they come back. Before that student re-enters the classroom, you have a great opportunity to have a quick conversation, help set that student up for success, perhaps have a quick chat about is there anything that we need to talk about. And I don't know, a lot of my relationship building and crisis de-escalation or tamping out of some bubbling problems happened in that doorway as students were coming back from that quick errand. So it's a nice way to take the spotlight off someone who's sort of who's experiencing some difficulty. And the last strategy that I'll share tonight before we open up for some questions is high probability requests. And that is the technique that's based on this idea of behavioral momentum. So it's operating under the assumption that students are more likely to obey teacher requests, to follow teacher requests if they're already engaged in compliant behavior. So we ask kids a series of tasks that are simple and quick to follow. And as we build this behavioral momentum and their students are getting positive feedback, that they are able to then attempt the more difficult request. And this is particularly helpful when students have shown a pattern of behavior, like they don't want to, for example, come to the morning meeting. They don't want to come to the rug to do silent reading, whatever it might be. But asking Jonah to grab that book from your desk, please. Great, thank you so much. Could you also tell me what our schedule is for the day? What special do we have before lunch? Great, thank you so much, doing great, high five. Okay, can you also grab your journal and come meet me over here? We're gonna get started with our reading, okay? So building that momentum feels good for Jonah. Jonah's being successful. You're not starting out with the challenging task, knowing that it's been difficult for Jonah. So if you're not familiar with NBA legends, Dennis Rodman is widely considered to be the most prolific and successful rebounder in all of the NBA. So what I invite all of us to do in the next days and weeks as we prepare to welcome students back into classrooms, as we sharpen our saws, as we sharpen our skills, is to pick one or a few max ideas that set a light bulb off in your mind. It could be developing a classroom plan or revamping a classroom plan. It could be pursuing some of the IRIS modules that help us look at some of the more targeted interventions. It could be thinking about how we can use some of the things that worked really well last year using Google Classroom. How do we use those to communicate our behavioral expectations to a wider array of stakeholders? Start somewhere. And what I hope we can do is come back as a group at either the September, October, or November sessions and talk about how some of these practices are going. We had a surface level sort of flyby overview tonight, but I really hope that some of the resources, once the PowerPoint's up, you can follow those nice and easily. I hope the resources are going to help you become even more capable of supporting in a proactive way kids' behavior in your classroom, teaching them what it takes to be successful in your classroom. And that, of course, transfers to our school communities, into our society at large. So I invite some questions. I'm sorry, we don't have too much time. If there are questions that we don't get to chat about and that you have to sign off before you hear any answers to, then I would be happy to answer those in either one of our future follow-up meetings or post it in a video in the coming days. So we can take questions in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute. We're not too big of a crowd. I think that's doable. So what's gotten you thinking differently, if anything, from some of the ideas that we shared tonight? Maybe you may want to share as an accountability piece. You may want to share something that you decide you might do a little deeper dive into as you get ready to welcome students back.
Bob had a comment in the chat.
That we can't punish kids or motivate them into relationships or long-term. Yeah, Bob. So same page, same page here in terms of the idea that we can't push them to this place. We've got to lead them to this place. And part of that certainly involves our work modeling these behaviors and showing students as they practice, as they acquire some of these new skills, showing kids that they are being successful, even if it's baby steps, finding that thing to celebrate. And I think that well, sorry, I just got distracted from the question from Samantha's great question about substitute teachers. I'll come back to my thought when it hits me. But we'll move to Samantha's. Samantha asks, do we have any tips for substitute teachers? So a classroom management plan is one of the things that Samantha probably wouldn't work very well if you're going into a classroom, a different classroom every day, or even if you were there for a week. By contrast, if you are there for a long-term sub position, that is something where I think that you could certainly set up a plan for your students that would, it doesn't have to be a brand new plan, but something that merges your expectations with the classroom teacher's expectations. For day-to-day subbing, when you're bouncing in and out of classrooms, I would encourage that positive classroom greeting. It's really, you don't have a relationship, and we just said at the beginning, relationships are the foundation upon which all of our successful approaches are. So that's certainly that's an Achilles heel of the position of a substitute teacher. You're coming in sort of blind with varying degrees of familiarity, usually a very low degree of familiarity with a group of students or several groups of students, if you're up in the middle school or high school settings. But setting a tone as students come in, one that is positive, one that's upbeat, and if you're lucky enough to be a building sub, as opposed to managing different schools or different districts, those relationships that you build, even in the short transition times with kids, students start to know you and start to know who you are, and when you believe in them and when you show an interest in them, I think that's a positive. That's a check in your corner for sure. And Anne, have you offered? Yep. But I think, Anne, I can.
I'm typing some tips.
Love it. Great, Anne. Yes, we love your wisdom and your insight. So having that positive disposition as well. Quick feedback. Sub's job is difficult job. Absolutely. Stacy's asking, how should we be looking at starting the year as student teachers when thinking about classroom practices, targeted intervention? I was talking about this with students who are in a pre-student teaching clinical placement with me at an elementary school. Stacy, having this conversation today. And so first and foremost, taking your mentor teacher, your cooperating teacher's lead certainly is a great starting point, but having conversations with your mentor teacher about the ways that they roll out, that they teach and reinforce important expectations and the procedures and routines. Do they have a plan? Does this happen sort of incidentally in your classroom, or does it follow a consistent plan? So I think that's a great place to start. And there's nothing stopping us in our instruction from integrating lots of opportunities to respond, so making sure that students are engaged in our instruction, and that will certainly be a nice starting point. Great. Yeah, that mutual respect, Sherry. Kelsey's asking substitute teacher. Okay, substitute teacher. Right, so you're often giving the respect, but not always getting it. So it's nice to see you're saying humor there. So that would be a surface management strategy that could be effective. I would explore the possibility of maybe the students having difficulty in terms of the academic content. Maybe they're not prepared to go it alone without their teacher, their trusty sidekick, the co-learning, their partner in learning, their leader in learning, and open to other ideas too about how to turn the page and redirecting. And sometimes that is another good place for some planned ignoring. If it's just one student, so you can say, okay, it sounds like you need a second to get it together, or to think, or get your resources ready. I'll come back to you. I'll come around in a few minutes to you, and come back and follow up one-on-one. So it's not a standoff with that student, and the whole class is waiting to see if Tony's going to open his book, right? And Anne, here we are at yours. Great. So arriving early. Yeah, look, absolutely great. Advanced warning, advanced time, super. Right, I was having this conversation too. So this exact piece about arriving beforehand, so you're not scrambling for papers and trying to find out what's where. You're here, your presence. So great, totally echo that suggestion, Anne. Great. And how about Samantha? Okay, so excited for a third long-term sub position, third grade, starting the first day of school. Excellent, great, super excited for you, Samantha. You'll do wonderfully. Don't do all of these things all at once, but pick a few of these important building blocks and start implementing them regularly, okay? And take another thing that I'm glad we have time to say is that as students experience difficulty in your classrooms, and you're trying some of these strategies, and sometimes they aren't working, or they won't work. These could be students for whom you'll need to provide more intensive, more targeted supports, both in the classroom and perhaps out of the classroom, some booster sessions. The best way to help figure out, hey, who are those people? Who are some of the students who need that first, is by maintaining some sort of log. So if you're having difficulty, as you're having difficulty with the same student or same small subset of students, you have not only just this hunch and this recollection of the past 2 weeks, but you have some data about when problem behaviors are happening. And to be able to do some investigation as to perhaps some of the causes of the behavior. And so that's a whole other set of approaches that's related to functional behavioral assessment. So that's operating with the understanding that behind every behavior is a cause, is a reason. So we don't have time to figure out all those causes as we're teaching. So the strategies that we talked about today are those surface level, those early warning, those early proactive measures. But there are steps that we can follow, and that's what I'd like to take some time in our follow-up meetings to talk about. How do we ramp up instruction and support when we're doing good things, but they're not yielding the outcomes that we're hoping for? Bob, to realize that being off-task behavior not related to you, absolutely. So just not a personal, not a comment about your personal being, or even about you as a teacher. So these off-task behaviors are happening. So the hallmark of you as a teacher is, how do we respond? Okay, so the problem has happened. So how do I respond quickly and effectively in a way that lets the student know that I care and that I'm ready to support you, to give you the skills that you need to be successful next time. And when patterns of misbehavior or challenging behavior happen, that's when we can dive a little bit deeper and not just be on an island by ourselves, but work with a team of colleagues at the school level or grade level to help talk about what's working and what's not working, and to develop a plan with colleagues and develop a plan with students themselves too. This is not something, kids can't feel like behavior teaching and behavior support is something that's happening to them. It's something that's happening with them to help them become more independent, help them become more successful in the classroom and beyond. So when kids hear that message consistently, then we've set ourselves and them up for successful continued instruction in the behavioral realm. So I don't see any other questions right now. So what I'd invite is that as you're reflecting on some of the topics and exploring some of the resources that I've shared tonight, and that will be clickable in the PowerPoint that we'll upload for you, thinking where it is that you can start, and starting small and building that continuum of practices. Lots of things to think about for student teachers and for early career teachers and for experienced teachers as we start a school year. So you can't do it all, but being planful and deliberate about teaching kids what they need to be successful, and doing that in a systematic way is going to be really, really helpful to us in our work supporting all kids.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hashey. Also, we just wanted to add that the course, or not the course evaluation, but the session evaluation form is in the chat. We've already got some great feedback from you all in the chat. Thank you. Also, there were a lot of questions about substitute teaching. So if you'll see the link that Dr. Del Prado Hill put in, we do have a series of 3 sessions on the PDS website for substitute teachers that Denise Harris at our Career Development Center put together. So those might be really helpful for you as well. Not all focusing on classroom management, but things that can help you, procedural things that can help you, find an easier way when you are substitute teaching. So thank you so much. We look forward to the follow-up sessions, and we hope you have a great start to your semester. Thanks, everyone.
Be relentless, folks. Be relentless in your work, in our work, helping all kids. Pleasure to chat with you tonight. Hopefully, we can continue the conversations in the coming months. Thanks again for being here.